Yeah, we'll go over.
Got it.
Um, the Gadara cylinder. Yeah. Mm,
Steve and them had Steve Nielsen.
anyway, we're here in Daniel 3. I kind of like this side by side. It, like kind of ignore the things that are like said here. But the reason being is that like sometimes you don't think of it this way, but these chapters do belong together because in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about an image. The Hebrew word is selim. I'm not really sure what the Aramaic word is. Probably something similar. They're like sister languages, right? And then in chapter 3, all of a sudden he makes a selim. So he was the head of gold in the dream that he had, that Daniel interpreted. And then he goes and makes an image in the next chapter, which is the entire image is made out of gold. And um, and the word image is interesting because it's supposed to be a thing that it's a thing that you're supposed to think of in your mind when you're reading it, that brings you all the way to the beginning of the Bible. And basically that God made the entire creation, but humans, he specified, are A, in charge of the earth, and B, they are made in his selim. It's the same word. It's an image. And so it's, later on you find out, like you're not supposed to make a selim, an image of God, and you're not supposed to make an image of anything, else that you're going to worship and those sorts of things. But there's really a lot of cultural background to the idea of what an image is, and we'll get into some of that later. But Daniel kind of but it's kind of like this: because you are his image, well, you don't make an image to him first of all because you don't want to the you don't want to confuse the creation with the creator. So we know that. But the other issue is that you're the living, breathing image. uh, um, Humans are. And for them to make an image of something else to worship is ridiculous in the sense that you have the image of God making images that they want to worship. And it actually brings you down a step. I think it was Isaiah who said people who make images and bow down to them become like them, right? And it's kind of like saying, you made a wooden image, you made a silver, it's useless, it's inanimate. You become useless in that sense, right? Yeah, you've lowered yourself to something that human hands could have made or whatever. But it's kind of the same idea here, and so it's kind of a big idea to kind of wrap your brain around. But we'll kind of like discuss it as we go along. Um, so let's go to verse 1 and open up the
3 verse 1.
yeah, chapter 3 verse 1. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image at Selim of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth was 6 cubits. He set it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. To give you about an idea of how tall 60 cubits is, it's about 90 feet. So if you can imagine a statue about like 90 feet tall, that's pretty big, especially if you're going to clad it in gold. Uh, and but I think that what you have here is you have all these lists of 6. So Daniel likes to use he likes to use the numbers 4. Like there's 4 kingdoms that he talks about. There's going to be 4 beasts that he talks about in Daniel 7. And he likes to talk about sevens, of course, because everybody in the Bible, it's about just about every Bible writer has sevens. Sevens kind of like a number of completion. But God made the universe in 7 days. Um, but there's an but there's a couple times where like you get these sixes that are repeated. So he's got 60 cubits high, 6 feet, 6 cubits across, and we're not told directly what this image is of, but it's connected to the dream in the chapter 2. So in chapter 2, the Selim, the image, is a symbol of human kingdoms, where the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Here in chapter 3, it's an embodiment of him, his gods, the Babylonian kingdom, etc. But you're kind of purposely not told exactly what the image is for. And I think it's good in the sense that it can represent a lot of things to us, right? So it in a way it's an image of human kingdoms, period. Just like the image was in chapter 2. And it's the exaltation of their own power and those sorts of things. But you've got this list of 6 right here, right? Then Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So here you got 1, the governors; 2, the counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, and so it's basically anybody that he could find and drum up. I know that's 5 mentioned here, but I think there's like differences. Down here, he mentions 6 of them. So satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, and magistrates. There's 6 types of officials named in verse 3. And they come and so like what he's doing right here is he's getting the leaders of the country. He's getting the people who kind of rule over him to kind of lead the way in the worship of this image. So, of course, if they do it, then the people will follow. But it's important for him to get his officials on board. So this is going to be a government down thing, you know. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And a herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O people, nations, and languages." I highlighted that because there's going to be a theme here where this is almost as if it's an international thing, kind of like when you get to the beast and its image in Revelation, that it's like all the world, all the peoples of all these languages and everything, they all start bowing down, right? It doesn't say just people of Babylon. It says of people, nations, and languages, Yeah, exactly. That when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, which could be a zither, the harp, and the bagpipe, it's probably not a Scottish bagpipe, it's something. And every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden Selim, the image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. Again, here you got 6 instruments that are mentioned, right? And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image, Selim, that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the picture here is that people from all nations, tribes, and tongues, or whatever, they all bow down and worship this Selim that's man created. Now, I bring up the number 6 because there's several stories in the Bible where you have a repetition of 6s, like Goliath. Goliath had, he was the weights and measurements, and his, there's all these 6s and that are related to talking about him. So, what is it about the number 6, right? So, if you think about the days of creation, man is created on the 6th day. So 6 is a human number already in that way. But there are 7 creation days, or at least there's a 7th day that God enters his rest. Okay. And what man is supposed to do is he is supposed to enter that rest with God. That's why on the seventh day, you are to enter into God's rest like God did. Now we think of like taking a break, or and we think of, and we also know that like, well, you got to keep it holy and those sorts of things. But there is there's a kind of a thing with that within the ancient world where on that, when something is completed at the completion of the cycle, and you have a lot of sevens repeated in ancient Near East. When you completed a temple, you did it in 7 step, and the god came and rested in his image, basically, in the temple, right? And so you have that on this as the 7th step. It's also a description. If you set up a kingdom, say you're a king and a conqueror, you would take your rest and you would rule from that rest. So that's, you sit on your throne, you're resting. It doesn't mean relaxation necessarily. It does mean that you've spent your time conquering and ordering the kingdom, and now you get to rule. So an invitation into God's rest for his people is also to enter into his rule with him. If you don't enter into God's rule with him, like Adam and Eve did not, right? They got kicked out of the garden. They did not rule with God because they took rulership into their own hands. That's what man's done every step of the way. So you've got those 6 steps, but he's not ruling with God. He's ruling on his own terms, making his own images, and it stopped short of that rulership with God, which is what man was created for, right? So you have like you get to the book of Hebrews, and remember it says, therefore let us enter into God's rest. There remains therefore a Sabbath day rest for the people of God. Let us enter into that rest. And you find out that it's not just about relaxation, it's about ruling with Christ, right? So there's a way that man was designed to rule the world with his creator and enter into that rest with his creator. But if he doesn't do that, and he still really hasn't, then you end up with 6s. You end up with like the not complete. Man still has a legitimate rule on the earth because he's supposed to rule. But what happens if he's created in God's image, but he acts nothing like God? There's somewhere along the line that image is going to be compromised. And so the question becomes, how is that image restored? And that image is restored, that question is throughout all of Scripture until you get to Christ, and then he becomes that new Adam. He becomes he's the answer to that. He rules and reigns, sitting at the right hand of the Father, and his followers are their destiny is to rule and reign with him and enter that rest,
Like,
enter the 7th day.
Jesus Christ is the image of the invisible God.
Yeah, he's the exact image of the invisible God, right?
In Romans 8:29, it says for us also to be conformed to the image.
Be conformed to the image of Christ. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see where this is going, kind of. Anyway, back to verses 8 through 12. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans. Remember, we were talking about Chaldeans. They were basically magic workers and occultists or whatever. Well, yeah. There's three definitions for Chaldean. One of them is that somebody from the area of the Chaldees. Another one is, of course, the language, speaking in Chaldean. But the third one is somebody who is a sorcerer.
Okay, so
right?
it's kind
Yeah.
of like a seer or
Yeah, it's like a seer. Well, that's the group that Daniel and his friends have been yeah, they're like fortune tellers and all that. That's why they were the Chaldeans were among the wise men, right?
They're like astrologers or stuff like that.
Yeah, astrologers, right? So that whole group of what they were called wise men that they couldn't tell the king the dream, but Daniel not because he's a Chaldean, but because God spoke to him and said, you know, like, this is the dream and this is how you interpret it, right? And so really remember Nebuchadnezzar was going to kill all these guys. Okay, so these Chaldeans, their skins were saved by what Daniel did. Okay, they would be gone by now. But what they're going to do now is they're going to narc on, not on Daniel. They're probably scared of narking on Daniel because, you know, he's one of the king's favorites, right? The king probably doesn't know that much about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, other than, you know, like, well, these are Daniel's friends that he wanted promoted, you know, because you know, Daniel knew how to interpret my dream and tell me what my dream is. You know, they probably don't want to bring up Daniel. Hey, you should go after this Daniel guy of yours, you know. No, but they do go after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it's a dirty thing, kind of like it's kind of like hey, these Chaldeans, you know, like that they would have been dead and gone, but now they're gonna start picking on you know, like Daniel's buddies. They're probably jealous because it's kind of vindictive. But you know, these guys wouldn't even alive if it wasn't for their friend Daniel. You know. Therefore, at that certain time, Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to the king Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, I mean, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." So this is going to be all about Nebuchadnezzar, his gods, and the image that he has set up. So it's almost like this kind of unholy trinity, right? You're going to see like the beast, the false prophet, and the dragon. You know, they come in sets of threes. You know. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? My gods, the image, and me." You know. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, they got to mention these every single time. You know, it's like it's that repetition, like where it's like, hey, pay attention to this. You know. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good, you know. So he's going to let them off the hook if they do this, you know, like if it had been somebody else, probably he would have been like, you know, like, oh, no, off with your heads or into the fire you go right away. He's giving them a chance, right? You know, now if you change your mind, if you're willing to do this, I'll give you one last chance, you know, and we'll call, you know, I'll ignore it this time. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? He's like, who is the God who's going to deliver you into my hands? Remember this, because this sounds like something in Revelation. It's like, who can stand against the beast? Who can, you know? It's always like, who's the God? You know. Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." I love that answer. It's just like, we're not even going to try to defend ourselves. If you've decided that's what's going to happen, then you may as well throw us in the fire right now, because we're not going to do it. We're not going to make excuses. We're not, you know, but there's no question about it. In their mind, they're not going to do this. They're not going to bow down. So if this be so, if you are indeed going to throw us into the fire, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar had said, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? They're like, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. You know, that's putting it to him pretty straight, you know. But if not, so even if he doesn't, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And you know, think about it. These guys have served faithfully in Babylon. They've helped build his kingdom. They got government jobs, and they've served him with integrity. But like when it comes to something like this, they're not going to budge. And so it's a kind of a the entire book is about, you know, like at what point are you going to be like, you know, like you're going to help your country, you're going to do this, and you know, like be a good citizen. And even if you're a citizen of Babylon, you know, there's a way to be a good citizen, but there's at some point where you're not going to bow down to your allegiance is not ultimately to your country or to a system or to an ideology or to a person or any of those things. Your allegiance is to God, and that's your primary allegiance, right? Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's interesting because this word expression here in Hebrew is selim again. So it's like, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and his selim, the selim on his face, was changed against Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. It might be kind of like an indication that, you know, even if he has a selim, it's subject to change, and sometimes he can't even control it because he can't even control his own emotions. You know, so his own selim changes here against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So, in other words, he looked on them favorably before, but now he doesn't anymore, and he suddenly changed his mind, and his image has changed. He ordered the furnace heated seven times more than it usually was heated. He's not just going to be like, okay, well now I got to reluctantly, you know, stand by my word and throw you into the fire. No, he's extra mad, and he's going to like, no, for you, I'm just going to make it all the hotter. Okay. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace. And these men were, you know, were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and other garments, and they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Because of the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he takes some of his mighty men here, and he just wastes their lives too. And this is kind of like typical dictators, right? It's like even your heroic people who fight for you and serve you and all that, they become expendable. That's the way tyranny is, you know. Like you know, like the ones who do the most for your nation are going to be expendable. You know, sometimes it's necessary, but sometimes it's just no, it's just wasteful. He just wastes those guys' lives. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the fiery furnace. So typical of man-made power systems, human life becomes expendable. Even the elite and mighty men are treated as fodder for the vision of tyrants. The 20th century was marked by an attempt to replace faith with God. It was also the bloodiest century. I don't know why I attached those two ideas, but you think of like the ideology and the things that, you know, people held up in the 20th century, communism and those things. More people were killed in the 20th century than any other century, and more Christians were killed by far in the 20th century than any other century. In fact, more Christians were killed in the 20th century than all other centuries combined.
I think it's even
You
like,
know,
isn't it even more than all the other centuries combined of everything about the killing?
I don't know.
20th century, I think more people were killed in war and stuff than all the other centuries throughout history.
Right. And you know, and it's and so much of it had to do with an ideology. And the I and it's an yeah, and it's an ideology that says that promises utopia. We as humans are going to we're going to get rid of God because you know we're going to be living in a post-Christian era now, and atheism was being pushed, and and you know like the man needs to bring in utopia and usher in utopia. That's still the way people are thinking, you know, with globalism, with what do you call it, even environmentalism, you know. Yeah, sure, we got to take care of the environment, you know, but when you start making that an idol, the image, and you start making that something that like everybody has to bow down to, and claiming that like we're going to usher in this thing and everything's going to be hunky-dory because of us or because of this ideology. Well, how did that turn out in the 20th century? And why do you think that it's going to be that much better or any better, if not much, much worse than the 21st century, if we keep on going down that path?
And they
You know?
keep, you know, making more and more weapons that just destroy things.
Yeah. It's all like about sixes, kind of, you know, so to speak, right? You know. By the way, LGBTQ flags got how many colors? I think 6. And then, but you know, God's rainbow's got 7. And just something, you know, little side
Well,
note.
they change it every week now.
Yeah, now it changes every week, so who knows?
That is interesting.
Yeah. Then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and he said, True, O king. He answered and said, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. You know, like he's
weird, like they knew what he meant by that too.
who?
Like the other wise men or whatever. Like he could just say like a son of the gods and they knew what he meant, like, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, so if you look in the King James, it says the 4th is like the Son of God. There's a little bit of a dispute about this. And I know at least in Hebrew, like when you're talking about uh, the word Elohim, um, you don't know whether it's plural or singular, except for the context. So, you know, yeah, it's like one of them is like a son of the Elohim, and then it means, and basically,
Bar Elohim, right?
yeah, Bar Elohim, and Bar Elohim doesn't necessarily mean if you were talking about like the son of the prophets, you're not talking about like, well, the prophets and then that's their children. You were talking about the prophets. Okay, it just means those in the company of the prophets. So he's thinking originally like this is one of the gods or something like that. And most likely that's kind of like what he's talking about. But it's hard, I think, to tell whether this is a singular or a plural. Knowing that he is a pagan, he's probably not going to be talking, one of them looks like the Son of God, like the Christ. He's probably not thinking that, okay? Being Nebuchadnezzar at this point. So, so it gets translated by a lot of people as a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fire furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. So now he's recognizing that whatever God Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego serve, that this is the Most High God. And he's already recognized that with Daniel when Daniel told him what he dreamed, right? So, and this is the way that that Elohim, you know, or Yahweh introduces himself to people. He says, you know, I am the Most High Elohim. You have all these other Elohim, and sure, there are other spirits that are like like they manipulate things, they do things, and there is a spirit world out there. In other parts of Daniel, they're called princes. They are, we could consider them angels. We Yeah, principalities are like the areas that they control. This is the rulers of this age is what Paul would call them, kings and their spiritual and the spiritual realm that are under that have rulership, right? But these are like what we understand as fallen angels. But to the ancient world, this is who they were calling Elohim, like the different gods. So it's defining it as like these gods that like the pagans worship. Some of them are made up, but there are those up there that they are genuinely worshiping these demons or fallen angels. Or in the case of John, in the Revelation, he actually is tempted to fall down and worship the guy who's given him the message there, and then that the angel's like, yeah, make sure you don't do that, because like I'm a servant like you. um but there but this is it, so it's the same thing. Who we know as the angels are basically who the pagans understood as their gods. But what Nebuchadnezzar is realizing is that out of all the spiritual beings, this one's different, and he's over them. He's the most high out of all of these other gods. Yeah, he may not realize that he's the one who created all the other gods, but he does know that this is the most high God. Okay. He says, servants of the most high God, come out, come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and king's counselors gathered together and saw. Satraps, prefects, governors, so all of the counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. So they didn't even smell like they'd been camping or anything. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. It's actually, the word is malak there, and messenger, and delivered his servants. So he recognizes that the Most High God has sent somebody lower than himself there to be with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In the King James tradition, because it is translated the Son of God, like some people believe that that was Christ himself that was in there. Some other people, or it could be the angel of the Lord. It doesn't specify who this was. Okay, but who Nebuchadnezzar recognizes this is that a messenger or somebody who is lower than the Most High God. He's like, okay, you go send out. He sent out somebody to be with them. Okay, so and
kind of like the angel shutting the mouth of the lions.
well, yeah. So like sometimes you see like if you look at like angels, sometimes is translated from the word Elohim. Like and other times we translate angels from the word malak, or in the Greek, the word messenger. So I'll give you an example of like where we translated into angels from the word Elohim. It's like, who is man that you are mindful of him? You made him a little lower than the angels, is what we got translate, right? In the Hebrew, it's the Elohim. So and check it out. So it's like you made him a little lower than the Elohim. So in some translations, they might even say the gods or the spiritual beings or whatever. You made him a little lower than them, but it's all kind of like we know that like this is who we identify as angels or whatever. They're the ones who God sends out and to do his bidding if they're good, if they're on his side. And if they're not on his side, then they're the fallen Elohim, or the, and that's what who we consider to be the demons or the demonic realm.
The ones who left their own abode, like it mentions
Yeah, that was a group of them. That was a group of them, the ones who left their own abode, did their shenanigans in Genesis 6. Well, anyway, they delivered his servants who trusted him, and who trusted him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, so he commends them. He's like, this is the Most High God who they must serve. And he's already got to know that from what, like he's seen with Daniel, right? And now, even though he was furious with them, he's actually going to commend them. He's going like, now these guys have, they got some nerve, and they got bravery, and they got some backbone, and I'll commend them for that. They were willing to go they were willing to die, and they weren't chicken. And he says, like, therefore I make a decree, any people, now think about that, like you might disgust the world with your insistence that you're going to serve only God, and you might even have to die for that, right? In some places, in some other time or whatever, you might have to die for that. And people did, right? But there are going to be those who recognize that as something amazing and great, and as many people that the Romans were like pushing off of cliff sides and killing, in the hundreds. But they would sometimes like bring them to a cliffside, and they just shove a bunch of and then the Roman soldiers would like shove a bunch of them off of a cliff, right? And some of them, some of the Roman soldiers would be like, if you're going to throw them off a cliff, they'd see how they were dying, right? And they'd be like, throw me off too, and they would be thrown off the cliff along with the Christians. That they were like, I see how these people, they won't budge, and they believe in this God, and I believe in him too because of what I just saw, and they would die along with them, Roman soldiers, so
they're gonna be in heaven.
yeah, there's always like those who you don't know, who will turn and trust in God just because either God saved you out of something, but even if he didn't, they look at that witness and they're like, no, I want to stand for something like that too,
Mark, okay, so Nebuchadnezzar responded really positive in this time, but when Daniel told him about the dream, it doesn't really say he said anything really, right?
Well,
He kind of didn't say anything, and then Daniel explained the dream to him, and then he built the statue, right?
Well, no, he didn't. This is the next chapter, so this is some time later. And
I forget, how did he respond to Daniel?
Well, when Daniel said that, what the ironic thing is that he treats Daniel like Daniel's a god.
Yeah.
Because he lights incense to him and he bows down before him and everything, So he has this. It's kind of like, it's a 180 response from Nebuchadnezzar, but it's a 180 response that in many ways is kind of like, yeah, he kind of got the picture. This is the Most High God, but now he's still acting like a total, like he's still like acting like a total pagan, right? Yeah, Daniel tells him, look, this isn't because of like something special to me. Only God would, and he chose to show me this. There's nothing about me that's special. Okay. God just showed me this, and that's all. I'm not like a Chaldean like you think. I'm not like a wise man like you think. It's just that God showed me this. That's all. Right. And then he treats Daniel like Daniel's some kind of a god, or like, lights incense to him. Come on, that's ridiculous. That's total pagan thing, right? So now this is kind of like where he doesn't 180 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, But check out what he does. Therefore, I make a decree: any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. It's kind of like,
Too far every time.
yeah, he just like he just has a carnal response to it every time. He's getting it, but he's still being ridiculous. Okay. He's like, they're going to be torn limb from limb and their house is laid in ruins. But hey, this is the way he did everything in his kingdom. So it's just like it sounds kind of Monty Python. Yeah. There is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they are already in charge of a bunch of stuff, but now they get even higher positions. So let me talk about the image a little bit. This is the Gudea cylinder. Is this what you were talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on this, it's from it's from ancient. I forget where exactly it is, but but on here there's like a bunch of instructions on how to build a temple, and it has 7 stages in there too. And the last stage is where you put the idol in the center of the temple, kind of like the Holy of Holies or something like that. And then you have this mouth opening ceremony, and the God that you were trying to worship would like breathe life into that image, right? And then that God would rest there or something, and rule from there. And this describes that on this cylinder, right? And when you think of like the creation story, though, you have a similarity, but you got one really big contrast. And the big contrast is that God builds his own temple, his own cosmic temple, and in the Holy of Holies, the Garden of Eden, or the paradise where he's going to be, the mountaintop, he takes what he's made out of dust, puts it in there, and breathes his life into it, and calls it his image, and that's human. So already you see like a whole different vision of humans from the Bible than you do in the pagan world. And sometimes I wonder, like, what came first, chicken or the egg? Some people are like, well, the Bible's totally influenced by like these pagan things, and it's like, no, how about these pagan things were totally influenced by the real thing, only it got twisted around. But either way you look at it, you've got something being said in scripture that was very different from the pagan world. The pagans believed that, like, another thing that they called the image of a god would be a king, because that king would represent that god, right? But it wasn't as if the gods really liked people anyway. So a typical scenario in most of these religions was that the gods created man to be their slaves. The gods would live on mountaintops, and they would live in these paradises. Sometimes they would live in tents or booths or tabernacles or whatever. And they would be like, well, we want to feast and live it up as gods. So we're going to create humans to be our slaves and provide for us. And so if you wanted things to go a little bit better for you here on earth, then hopefully you did things that would make the gods appeased, happy enough so that they didn't just wipe you out or kill you or abuse you or something, right? And so if you had a human king, then that was your connection to the gods, because they would rule you on behalf of the gods. So, and you would treat them as the image of those gods. So the king was considered an image of the gods. But there again, in Genesis, you have Adam and Eve that they are said to rule, and it's not just that they're not supposed to be slaves, and just provide for Yahweh or whatever. No, they're meant to rule with him. In fact, God puts them in that paradise along with him and and invites them in to like even eat of the tree of the of life.
He gives them a job too.
Gives them a job, and so like if you were an ancient pagan reading Genesis for the first time, you're going, wait, who is this God who would like call humanity kings and images of himself? It's like it's a totally different picture than what they thought. They were just scared of their gods. Now the Jews, they were fearful of God, and on one hand, but they also knew that God really loves us and wants something big for us, but we have to rule on his terms with him, and that's what man was designed to do. But it's much different from what the pagans were believing. So that Selim, or the image, like in a nutshell, I'd kind of describe it like this: that God created man in his own Selim and told them to rule on his behalf. Man is to represent God on earth in his rule. We're priests and kings, right? Adam and Eve were priests and kings, and the people of God are priests and kings. You ever heard of what's his name? N.T. Wright. He said, what this idea of kings and priests, it's like to, as priests, to bring to bring creation's praises before God, and as kings to bring God's rule to bear on earth. You've got, you're to rule on God's behalf on earth, and then also to sum up the creations, the praises of creation before God. You represent creation to God, and you represent God to creation. It's like you're the go-between, you're the ambassador, ambassadors now of Christ. God's people were told not to make Selims, first because not to blur the distinction between creator and creation, but second, you're the image, so to bow to handmade Selim is actually demeaning. And the tragedy of the fall is that God's image went rogue. So they're like, well, we want to be our own image and make things in our own image. Man, the image of God, created images of his own making. And the question, of course, in the Bible is, how does this get resolved? Of course, we know that it's Christ. The story of the Bible is that God became human to be the image that Adam fell from. He is the new Adam, and his followers are transformed into his image, just like you were saying, Aaron. And his image is the exact representation of the Father. So the Selim of Babylon, what we see here is that Babylon is this archetype, right? This is archetype of man's rulership against or without God. It is man creating his own images, whether they are of himself, his gods, his ideology, his politics, his nations, his nationalism, his globalism, humanism, whatever kind of ism that's what we come up with, and make other people bow down to that. It's like these are all things of our own makings. Some of them are worse than others, some of them are better than others, but they all detract from who you are really to bow down to, who is God himself. So this whole ideology and nationalism and all that, it requires that people devote their loyalty and allegiance to them. Man-made images replace God with human constructs. So on one hand, we do have authority that comes from God, and it's legitimate. God legitimizes the authority that humans still possess. In fact, remember in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, is told by Daniel, you rule over the peoples, the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, and all that. He's bringing it back to Genesis, right? He says, you, our king, are like what's described with Adam and Eve. Like you are a ruler, like you are supposed to be in one sense. The only thing is that what you're building isn't going to last, because you're doing it like out of the context, against or without God. That's your problem. But you do have legitimate authority, and you do rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, etc. That's Adam and Eve's job. So on the one hand, you have that legitimate authority. all authority comes from God, right? But on the other hand, man is fallen, and his authority is in the end, it becomes abusive, and it's always doomed to fail. It always comes to an end. And even if it's well-meaning, somebody's standing right behind you with a dagger, ready to stab you in the back and take over. You know, people be like, communism's really never been practiced reality. Honestly, neither is capitalism, because people always, you always end up with like the elite controlling things, and crony capitalism, which isn't capitalism at all, but yeah, but what, like, fair enough, but you know what, the real version of all these things can't be practiced, because there's always somebody behind you, like, who's ready and willing to be a tyrant and use your well-meaning ideology against you. It's
It's like saying like, oh, well, like, we're gonna do a political movement of fairness.
yeah,
That discounting human nature, someone's always gonna be unfair.
somebody's always going to be unfair. It always ends up being tyrannical in the end. So I like this. I like the way Tim Mackey, and I got to credit him for a lot on this chapter 3. This is his words. He goes, God's the king of the world, but the storyline of the Bible is that God has chosen to partner with and to rule the world through his images. So he's chosen to rule it through earthly family, which is us, and a spiritual family, which is the angels, right? We both have our ability to rebel or to serve him, you know. His image-bearing creatures, back to man, his image-bearing creatures who rule the world on God's behalf. And what's happening here in this story in chapter 3 is that this image here is now representing this distortion of the fabric of the universe. I like that, because now all of a sudden you have humans worshiping this image in the shape of a human. But what does this image represent? It represents human rule. It represents humans creating a nation and an empire and a way of life and a culture, and then treating that as if it's God. And we see this all the time. This is why the world never changes. It's always like we always end up like in the same kind of places with tyranny or whatever. There's some connections here to Revelation 13:16, and we're going to what Daniel's going to develop next is the idea of the beast. And the idea is that like when you start creating images and man falls short with those sixes, like not ruling with God and entering into his rest and ruling with him, what ends up happening is that he becomes something less than what humans were designed to be. Okay. And they get reduced to a beast. And they also fall to a beast. There's a whole other bag of things that like we'll start opening up. Well, we'll like this new can of worms next week. Or in 2 weeks, I should say. So this whole idea of beast and images is all connected. So it says here, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? Like what God is going to deliver you out of my hand,
In 2 weeks?
in 2 weeks when Nebuchadnezzar is actually when Nebuchadnezzar is reduced to like an animal in the field.
Bible study. It's just in 2 weeks when that's.
Yeah, in that story. Yeah, next week is actually the mirror of this, where Daniel ends up in the lion's den. So that's the mirror of the chiasm. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. But so like, who's like the beast and who can fight against it? Verse 7 there, and it says, all authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. It's that same. The beast is given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, just like Nebuchadnezzar. All the people and nations and languages, and verse 11. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, and it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast. You get that image thing again, right? And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. This is, see, it's going to go even further, because like when you start worshiping an image, you might start with like worshiping a man-made image, right? But then Satan sees a door that, like, if I can get you to worship something besides an image, I can probably get people to worship me through an image, you know? So anyway, so that the image of the beast might even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. In other words, it's just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You don't worship this image, you die. You get thrown into the fire or beheaded or something, you know? And then, of course, let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. It's the number of a man. His number is 666. That's a lot of debate over that number.
I've seen so many different.
Yeah, there's so many
Yes.
different versions of that.
You know, and they try to calculate, you know, certain names.
Yeah.
Up to the number, and I've seen, you know, do you know how many possibilities there are, how many names out there you can calculate to that? With the
Yeah.
different, you know, it's like.
I think that, like, I think part of the, if you want to decipher what, if you want to decipher what Revelation is talking about, just go into the Old Testament, because John is always citing something from the Old Testament, and you're just going like, what have we seen 666 before? We did see it with Solomon when he starts going off the rails and acting like a human king.
How did we see it with Solomon?
Solomon collected 666 talents of gold annually, when the king of Judah was never supposed to. It says there in the law they shouldn't collect gold like excessively. They shouldn't have all these horses and chariots. They should never go back to Egypt and buy these horses, and they should never collect wives to themselves. They should not. All of that's all like in the law, and then Solomon goes and disobeys all of those things. You know, so you're going, oh, okay, so there's a connection there, and then you've got all the connections with sixes going all the way back to, you know, you're going, okay, you've stopped short of the you know, entering into God's rest and ruling with him. You're a man trying to run things just from that, but not going the next step and actually doing what you were supposed to and what you were created to do. That's just to rule with God. So Colossians 1, he, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So here, this is why Paul, when he's talking here, he says that Jesus is the image of God, okay? He is what man is supposed to be, right? But then not only that, but like he created all of these things, and then he gets into the thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities. So there, it's about kingdoms. And he's not just talking about man kingdoms, he's talking about kingdoms that exist in the heavenlies too. So whether visible or invisible. So the visible thrones are the ones that we think of, King so-and-so and Nebuchadnezzar and President so-and-so, and those authorities, right? Dominions and rulers. But he's also talking about the invisible ones, the principalities, the powers, this present darkness. Right. But, you know, but they also have a legitimate power in the sense that God did create them to rule the heavenlies, you know, so they are in a sense a holy host. So they actually do have a claim to that. So it's like you will see this story kind of like unfold and emerge of like what actually happened. How did Satan, get control of these things? So God created the heavenly hosts first, sun and moon and stars. There's only two times in Genesis where it talks about ruling. We know we humans are there to rule, but the first rulers that are mentioned are the sun, moons, and the stars. And later on, we find out that sun, moon, and stars are also emblematic of the spiritual, the spiritual rulers. That's why David's saying, when I look at the stars and the heavenly hosts, who's man? You think of you made them a little lower than the Elohim. So he's thinking about the stars. And you have in Revelation, of course, the stars as the fallen angels that are thrown out of heaven. These are all symbolic of the heavenly hosts, whether good or bad, right? But God created them first. They existed before humans were created. Humans came on the scene last. Okay. There is a theme in the Bible where the first will be last, last will be first, those sorts of things. But like you see it where the youngest takes over, the eldest. The kingdom's not given to the eldest, and ends up being given to the youngest, right?
And then also it says, might be in Isaiah where it says, and a child shall lead them all.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So God created the heavenly hosts first, the older to rule the heavens, and the humans last, the latecomers, the latecomers on the block, the younger to rule the earth. It says, man was made a little lower than the angels for a little while, according to Hebrews. Okay. All authority is given to the Son of Man, the human, who is above all kingdoms and authorities. The world to come is not given to angels in Hebrews 2, but to Christ and his followers, those who are transformed into his image, into his Selim. And that's kind of like what, boy, I ended it on that. Okay. Yeah, it's almost like I'm missing a slide there. But anyway,
Right here in Isaiah 3:4, it says, I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them.
yeah. So like it was like the younger Jacob and Esau, the younger rules, and then and a lot of
The interesting thing is that he grabbed his heel, kind of like that heel thing that
usurper,
the mention of the striking the heel, kind of thing.
Kind of, yeah, right,
It's just
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I've thought about that. So there's something about Jacob that you're going, okay, I get it, but something's not right here with Jacob.
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
hidden understanding.
His name needs to be changed too, like once he gets that. But sort of like where I'm going, like there are actually people, like when you hear the parable about like the prodigal son, who's the older brother, is like, I never left you, like, and why are you throwing a party, and why are you putting the gold ring on him, and that sort of thing, and putting, dressing him up like he's in charge or something like that. Some people actually think that is is a picture of humanity who's gone astray, now being brought back in, and the older brothers, so to speak, the angels going, well, we never left you, like, what's up, I don't know, but there's some things that have always bugged me about that, because I don't think he was talking about the Pharisees and the priests and all that, because he was calling them, well, John the Baptist was calling them brood of vipers, and Jesus comes around and says, you are of your father the devil. He doesn't consider them as having not strayed from God. He thinks that they're far away from God, right? So I don't think that like the older brother can be compared to them. Maybe maybe a couple, a handful of Jews who were true to God and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. So there's always like the parables are really easy on one level a lot of times, then really difficult on other levels. It's like layers of an onion, right? But yeah, there is that story there that like that when we get to Daniel 7, what's remarkable about that is that you have the Son of Man um, coming with the clouds of heaven, being seated next to the Father. This is above all the angels and everything, right? So when Daniel sees this, he's like, "Wow, there's a human up there," and that's so when Jesus like went around, he preferred to be called the Son of Man. People are going, he never called himself Messiah. He was the Messiah, but he that wasn't his preferred title. He didn't like going around calling himself that. He preferred the Son of Man. And because when he would use the words the Son of Man, you got to be thinking about Daniel 7, right? And Daniel 7 is going to show you something where what the destiny of man was that's made possible from Christ, and that is to rule with God. And in Revelation it says, to him who overcomes, he will sit next to me on my throne as I have been seated next to my Father. And you're going, that's a high position. And what the writer of Hebrews is saying, that the world to come is not handed to angels. It's given to first Christ, but also his followers. Yeah. And you just go skip ahead and go to Daniel 7. You're going to see that what it means for the Son of Man to be up there is that the kingdom was given to them. It becomes plural in the language, and it meant that because of what Christ did, the kingdom was given to all these who were being trampled by the Antichrist, or by the beast, I should say, in that chapter. So,
so the mention of when Jesus gave told them, he was reading from the scroll of Isaiah in the hearing, and he said, today in the hearing the prophecy is fulfilled. And then it kind of went down a little bit, and then says, I think maybe it's there somewhere else that they gnashed at him with their teeth, like in resembling like a beast, kind of thing.
right. Well, okay. I am letting the cat out of the bag a little soon, but like it's a teaser for we'll get there in chapter 7. Jesus himself in chapter 7, you see the beast trampling on the saints, and then you see the Son of Man being put up there, and then it says, and they were given the kingdom. So it's kind of like the saints who were being trampled were given the kingdom, that whole thing, right? But what happens with Jesus is that he is in front of the Sanhedrin on the night before he's going to be crucified, and he tells them, from now on, you will see the Son of Man riding on the clouds and being seated to the coming on the clouds and being seated on the right hand of the Father. It means coming to his throne. He's basically saying, from now on, you're going to see Daniel 7 come to pass, right? What's about to happen to Jesus is he's about to be tortured and killed by them. So if he's calling himself the Son of Man in that scenario, what's he calling them? He's calling them the beast.
That's
Yeah, right. And they're not just going to trample him. They're going to trample a bunch of his saints, like Stephen. Stephen's the next person who says, I see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of the Father, and they stone him. And then he says something that sounds very much like Jesus says, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Right? It's almost like but it's kind of like if I come, like this is Tim Mack again, but like if I came up to you and I said, you are I am your father, come join me, right? Who am I? I'm Darth Vader. Who am I calling you? Luke, right? So if Jesus is like, you're about to like kill me and torture me, or hand me over or whatever, from now on, they're going, they're like, tell us truly, are you the Son of God? And he says, you said it, and I say to you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Father. He's quoting Daniel 7. And if he's the cloud rider about to go up to the seat of the Father or whatever, and they're tearing their robes and throwing fits and conniptions and like, that's it, we're going to crucify you. Who's he calling them? He's comparing them to the beast in Revelation, in Daniel 7. Okay, so it gives you a little bit of a clue that like the beast is kind of a conglomeration. It's probably not the exact same identity of the beast like that we're going to see in the future, and it's not that, but it's a big part of it because Jesus gives us, basically, he says, from now on you're going to see this.
like sometimes the beast seems like an actual person or two, and then other times it seems like more like a government or a system,
Yeah, and I think that it has as much to do with man, but it's also there's spiritual powers behind it.
Like it says the one beast has like 10 horns,
Right.
7 heads and 10 horns.
Yeah, but there are multiple people in that.
I've heard of that being like the UN too. Like if you look at the 10 most powerful, who knows?
Yeah, the beast is like it's like, with the horns, it says like there's 10 kings there already, so that the beast isn't just one person.
And they reign as for an hour with the beast, give their power to the beast and join with
Right.
to
They're
fulfill
saying we know it's 10 kings because there's 10 heads in them, or 7 heads and 10 horns.
Well, what I'm saying is that like you can't think of the beast as one person or one, but you can think of the beast as an entity, but just by the description that there's multiple horns and stuff like that, you can't say, well, the beast is this one person. It's like there's there's a quality about the beast where it's telling you that that there's more than one person involved in this. It's some kind of a system, and it's not just human. It's also there's also something demonic about it. Like there's
the 3 frogs that come out of the
right, like there's spirits that come out. There's all these weird things that happen. So
there's frogs too.
yeah, that's in Revelation. I don't know what to make of that. That there's like there were spirits that look like frogs that came out of the mouth of, was it out of the beast and the dragon, yeah, something like that, like all 3 of them. So this is like a bunch there, but where Jesus,
they're parables.
Yeah.
More parables.
Yeah, I don't know.
Using one thing
to describe something else, yeah,
to describe something else.
yeah. Revelation's a tough book, but you have to go back to the Old Testament. People are always trying to guess the news from just Revelation or something like that, and it's kind of like, no, it's not about guessing the news. It's trying to see, it's seeing the world through a different lens, like that image that the beast in Revelation 7. you're going to see, well, you're going to see four beasts, and one of them is Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. So and so you're going, okay, so we're not talking about like a literal beast. Or the beast is symbolic of something.
It's about like you know how it mentions you know like you know whatever kingdom's in power, that's the beast, you know, and then there's this horn
Yeah.
coming up, you know, from the first beast, or you know the other horns were broken down, and that was basically symbolizing the you know that kingdom being broken down, but then coming back up, you know, from like a little bit, but then expanding again. So
Right. Well, what all I'm saying is that, like, why would you look at Daniel where it explains who the beasts are in Daniel 7? At least we can figure it out from the first one, that like the first one's Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom, right? And then when we get to Revelation, then think about the beast as something like literal, or something like that. It's like, no, what uh, Revelation is using Daniel as a model, you know, and saying, you know, like the way that Daniel is talking about Nebuchadnezzar being a beast, and there's another kingdom, there was another beast, another kingdom, or whatever. Now you got a kingdom that's different. That's another beast. That's what I'm talking about now. That's what John is seeing then. Um, but 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 to understand what John is talking about, you got to go back to Daniel and go, this is how Daniel was using this, or this is how like the visions are being explained to him.
letting the Bible
Yeah, let the Bible interpret the Bible, right? Instead of like coming up with all these wild ideas about the beast, especially if you're going to say, well, you know, like, oh, we're going to do this not symbolically but literal, you know, literally. I don't know if anybody actually believes that there's going to be a beast and a dragon, and
Well, I think a lot of people think there's gonna be a great world leader that's the Antichrist.
yeah, a great world leader. So like, you know, so, and I think that's going to be, you know, that's,
Is that a system too, you think? Or you
yeah,
think-
it's, you know, like, is it going to be a
says there's
system
two
that,
beasts, right?
you know, yeah, the what in Revelation,
Yeah.
there is the dragon, there is the beast, and then the false prophet, and then they have, and they make an image,
and then also the harlot riding on the beast.
and then you get the harlot riding on the beast, right, which is Babylon, the harlot, the mystery Babylon.
Yeah, that's a weird-
And that's a toughie, because like you think of Babylon as the beast, right? But you're going, mystery Babylon is something a little bit different.
Yeah, it's like, and this harlot is riding the beast, so
Right.
so it's like, you know, whoever this mystery Babylon mother of harlots is riding on.
Right. I think it has something to do with religious system and
Yeah.
Jerusalem and stuff.
I watched
No.
this video where this guy
Yeah.
has the whole Catholic Church is the beast.
Well, yeah, well,
It's weird, he breaks it down in
yeah,
detail.
a lot of people saw the Catholic Church in that. I would say, yeah,
But I
you're
heard that
it's
the
part
Catholic
it's
Church-
part true.
The
but-
Catholic
but-
Church has killed more Christians than any other thing on the planet.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, but see, there's going to be a big, there's, Paul talks about there's going to be a great apostasy in the end times, right?
Yeah, well,
And it means that there's going to be a falling away in the church, within the church itself.
Some people that follow God.
Yeah, so what you have to watch out for is like, and you can't just go like, oh, it must be the Catholics. The Protestant churches had their shenanigans too, man, you know, and it's like they don't, you know, like sometimes they don't have, you know, like maybe they didn't have like all that stuff like with papacy and stuff like that, but you can't get too comfortable with saying, just pushing it all on the Catholics, you know. I don't know. Go ahead, Gary.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I think that this Daniel 7 is gonna be more true if we read it and try to understand it, because already at the front he's already stated that, you know, God gave him the, you know, to have vision of
Yeah.
his prophesizing. And then here when he talks about it in Daniel 7, I think that says a lot. I mean, you don't have to add to it, or just read it what it says.
Yeah. there is part of it like where what are you talking about, like the beast, or are you talking about the Son of Man thing, or just the whole thing in general, or
Just the whole thing in general. I'm just saying we as human beings make it more complicated than it has to be. God's
yeah,
got it all figured out,
God's got it all figured out. Yeah.
you know,
Um,
and he's our God and he loves us.
yeah. I
And
think
and,
like
and that's something we got to remember and our focus on Jesus because he was his son. I mean, he was
yeah,
God.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then and like I say, we always try to make it more complicated than it has to be.
yeah, I
We
think
just,
so.
I that's just me. It's because I don't know, I haven't really studied Revelation because there are so many different types of people with interpretation.
Hmm.
And I give them, I I go from the word. You know?
There are, yeah, that's kind of like there are certain things that, um, like, so I don't want to go. I didn't want to make this a Daniel Bible study, like where
Yeah.
kind of like this equals this, and look at this political leader, and this is the Catholic Church, and this
No,
is
it's not that.
and this is like the, because there's something that's very there's a message in that whole thing which is like universal to all Christians and all
Well,
believers, and
I
there's
mean,
something that there's that we've seen, and we've seen it through history. There are, um, I'm going to kind of like on the surface like cover some of the way that people have interpreted these things, and
yeah.
sometimes I think that they're part right and then the part wrong. And then for the rest of it, sometimes I'm not really sure. Um, and But there is something there to there are a number of things there to like keep in mind. We'll get there when we get there, you know. Um,
Yeah, because he even brings up, I know in 7 he talks about it's about the seed of Abraham.
So I was just gonna say, Solomon sums it up in Ecclesiastes 12:13. He says that after going through his entire life and trying out basically everything and collecting all this wisdom, he says, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for God will bring every work into judgment, whether it be good or evil.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and you do get that from Daniel 7, that like the righteous are going to be vindicated, and they're going to and in chapter 12 they are going to be resurrected, and
But
Well, that's a
it's
promise of the Lord. He says he's going to get vengeance for us.
yeah,
it's also important to be aware of certain things because there's a lots of warnings about false prophets, false teachers.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know, and you gotta discern.
right,
Gotta,
yeah. We ask the Lord for discernment.
it's good to learn these things because Jesus, is telling us to watch. What are we watching for? We're we got to understand these things so that we know what we're watching for. And
Yeah,
then, like the mention of the in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4 says, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away happens first, and the son of perdition is revealed, the man of sin,
mhm,
who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, and so he sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So it sounds like Antiochus Epiphanes. It sounds like Caesar Nero.
mhm,
It sounds like it could be the Pope at certain in certain centuries. During the Dark Ages. It could have been that. So it seems like it's shifting into different times.
mhm.
Whoever seems to be in that seat of pride at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, so history may not repeat itself, but it always rhymes. So,
yeah.
yeah. Well, guys, I'll anybody have anything to add, and otherwise I think I'll close this session out.
Oh,
Yeah.
very good.
All right.
Good.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, thank you. Thank you
And
very much.
Thank you.
see you, John. All right.
All right. We'll see you guys. Bless you guys. See you later.
All right. Bye.
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 Did you see that video I sent?